Jami Amerine, author, speaker, artist, wife, mom, and friend. This week's episode is called Bloom Where You're Planted. Today's episode is brought to you by independent beauty consultant Jennifer Willerton, the only person I trust with my face. So let's get this thing started. Hello friend, this is Jami Amerine, author and blogger at Sacred Ground Sticky Floors, and today we are talking Bloom Where You're Planted. Ah, the platitude. But I promise, we're going to get to the nitty-gritty. Many of us have found ourselves in a weird place, either socially, religiously, or both. In our marriage or in our motherhood or any situation, life can smell like armpit. Believe me, I know. But it is in these places that I have been able to look back and see the truth about God's design on my life. And no, I'm not talking about that He did these things to me, but the way that He led me through them and helped me cope and showed me things that changed me in good ways. Not all bad. Sometimes they're bad, but I know it's not easy to feel isolated and alone. Believe me, again, I've been there the majority of my life. Worse still is being misunderstood. I have nothing but empathy and compassion for anyone who has been falsely accused. A long time ago, I was falsely accused of having feelings for one of my best friend's husbands. To add injury to the insult, because seriously, this woman's husband was like so gross, and he was like 20 years older than me, and he reminded me of my elementary school principal that eventually got fired for doing that pull my finger trick, which, oh my gosh, so inappropriate. But anyway, and I'm married to Justin, who's a total hottie, so this really was nowhere on my radar. She had several other people come and confront me and tell me to stop flirting with them. Seriously, I had just put my littles down for a nap and I was about to do some household chores and they rang the doorbell and I looked out the peephole and there's 4 of what was at that time my closest friends, and they just looked like sullen and upset. And so I was like, oh my gosh, come in, is something wrong? And they were like, yeah, stop flirting with so-and-so's husband. And I was like, what? I was utterly appalled. I could not recall any incident where I had been flirtatious with this old creepy man. And to add to that heartbreak and humiliation, I learned that he had told his wife that I was sensually rubbing up against him and that I had put my hand on his thigh and run my hand up his thigh. A thigh that was covered in polyester plaid golf pants that he frequented with white socks and black tennis shoes. Yeah. But anyway, I vomited a little in my mouth, and then when they left, I locked myself in the bathroom and sat on the floor and sobbed. I was so mortified. But look, I know me. I know who I am. And even at that point in my life, I knew that was not true of me. In fact, it had never even occurred to me. But I was helpless against the allegations. There was nothing to do but rest at the foot of the cross and let God be my defender. And yes, I wish I could tell you this story had a happy ending. I guess in some ways it does. It got us out of a toxic church setting and away from lunatics. What man intended for evil, God intended for good. However, in that season, I could not understand why I had been forced into this corner of isolation and loneliness. My kids even heard about it in Sunday school. But I would like to propose that this island, this place, seems lost and things are completely out of control. It is also one of the places that we often find a face-to-face meeting with Jesus. I was more recently contacted by one of my original accusers who emailed me at my work address. We'd had no contact whatsoever since the incident. And as it turns out, that song and dance was a regular for these couples. And now she too had been falsely accused of chasing after this self-labeled Don Juan with yellow-green teeth and a sad comb-over. I will say it felt great to be exonerated. However, it was a little late and we had moved on. My reputation in that circle had been tarnished and my character had been brought into question by people that I really did care about and at the time really needed in my life. Loneliness is a heavy hand, and it's easy to say, make the best of it and shine bright for Jesus, when all you can see is disaster and emptiness before you. However, as this memory stewed this morning, I saw something unusual in my neighbor's yard. I was like out for a walk, and I just caught a glimpse of this, and it was weird because I was actually thinking about this podcast. there was a mushroom growing in the crook of this huge tree. The fungal blossom was sitting there all alone, and beneath the tree was a circle of mushrooms grouped together. And the circle of mushrooms grouped together at the bottom of the tree were so close together, it looked like they were holding hands. And I just had to. I jumped up on the grass off the curb and went over, and with my phone, I snapped a picture that I'll use for this image, for this podcast, of this little mushroom growing up by itself in this tree. And I decided after I saw that I really wanted to think about how I was going to approach this, because my mind was just firing on all cylinders about this place of isolation where there was still growth. And I didn't take a picture of the gang of mushrooms down at the bottom of the tree because I figured they had each other to document the day. But the mushroom in the tree was completely alone. When I neared the corner of our home on my way back around, I noticed that the neighbors with the mushrooms, their lawn maintenance crew had showed up. And one of the workers was like methodically mowing these straight lines back and forth. And I just stood there as he neared the tree and watched him plow over this circle of mushrooms, destroying them with his riding lawnmower. I decided to make another block. And so I went all the way back around, and then I went to check to see about that single mushroom, safe and sound, in the nook of the tree. You know, sometimes we can go with the crowd and thrive, or they can be our downfall. In the safety of my father's arms, I was taken to an uncomfortable place, and it felt like I was completely alone. I hadn't known that place ever. Even though we moved a lot when I was a child, and I did find myself isolated a lot. This time it was a lot different. I thought that these were going to be people that were with me forever. And I talk about this in my writing too, because I actually didn't pursue a writing career. Now that I have some writer friends, I noticed that, or I hear their stories about all the networking that they did and all the places that they reached out and how they made all of their connections. And I was talking to my publicist, and she said, well, I'm sure you have tons of connections. And I was like, I really don't. And I said, I kind of describe it as when you come into a new situation like that, or even an old situation. But I said, for me, it was that old feeling of pulling a chair up to a table and sitting down, and I hadn't been invited, and then everybody getting up and leaving. And then as that progressed, the reality of it was there was people that came to the table and were welcoming and dear, and I loved it. But when I was completely alone, I was in a place where I got to be closer to God. And then the people that came back and stayed and that held me up and rallied around me, and I rallied around them, those are my real friends. Those are the people that I believe God just put in my life for growth and companionship. So, in that place of loss and tears, I really did just kind of lay in the lap of a God that loves me. Away from the chatter of playdates and potlucks, I notice now that I did hear God more clearly. I found comfort in some scriptures and discomfort in others, and I had an intense desire to write. And once those floodgates opened, I found myself writing about things that I know changed me, and now I'm blessed to say that those things changed my readers and my listeners. Certainly, I don't delight in that season. Even thinking about it, it was so embarrassing. Y'all, it was just embarrassing. I would be lying to you if I said it was pleasant, but I can look back on it and see where I grew in great strides, and I was set free from things that simply were not for me. They were not in my best interest, and probably not in the best interest of the people that I was around. My relationship grew in leaps and bounds, and I was encouraged by God alone in this way. Despite the hurt, I look back at it and I blossomed. Sometimes the hardiest plants, like cactus, for example, which is my favorite. I'm have some New Mexico roots, and we live in Texas, and I love cactus. They're treacherous seasons that we develop this spiny shell, like an outer shell, but that's to protect ourselves. And even prickly pear cactus, with their gruesome skin-piercing spines, also produce amazing fragrant blossoms, and they're yellow and pink and orange, and they're lovely. We can learn from seasons of hurt how to protect ourselves and still blossom beautifully in our gifts and talents. Really, when you think about it, some of the most beautiful plants and blossoms also have a method of protection in place. These are the most advanced types of blossoms, like a rose. There's this delicate beauty, and then there's this impossibly thick, hardy stem with harsh thorns that protect the blossom. A blossom in the perfection of metaphor is just an inspiring thing of growth, of change, of development. So when I say bloom where you're planted, it doesn't mean to stay stagnant or passive. It means to grow, change, adapt, develop a safe zone for yourself. I think I learned anything from the implied interest of my old friend's hubby. It was that I can't change what someone believes about me, but I can change how I feel about me, and I can change my relationship with myself and my God. Someone else's opinions are theirs, and I'm most careful about choosing friends now. I would rather just have one or two, ones with both blossoms and a protective outer shell, than a bunch of poisonous mushrooms who eventually all go down together because they were not willing to listen, ask real questions, and go to the hard places where growth is more of a challenge. So friend, are you in a season that has you up a tree with nowhere to look but Him? Bloom there. Are you hurting and no one seems to understand or hear what you know to be true of you? Bloom with Him. Some days it may be easier than others, and yes, some may call this a prosperity message. Okay, fine. Call it that. I would like to suggest that anytime we're in communion with the God who knows us, we are indeed prospering and blossoming. I fully believe it's possible to bloom under the most obscure circumstances. Rest in the arms of the God that knows everything about you and stays anyway. Today's scripture is John 8:12. Then Jesus again spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And friend, that is the light that nourishes our blooms. I'm Jami Amerine. This has been another episode of Sacred Ground Sticky Floors podcast. Today's show was brought to you by independent beauty consultant Jennifer Willerton. Her links are in the show notes below. Do me a favor, please subscribe, rate, and review this on iTunes. It does me a world of good. And I have a treat for you. If you will screenshot your review on iTunes and then DM me on Instagram at Jami Amerine with your mailing address, I will send you one of my hand-painted cards with a handwritten note. You can see the cards in my Etsy shop, which is called Jami Amerine Studio, and the link is also in the show notes. Until next time, friend, Jesus be all over you. Go on and bloom.